morning, everybody, and welcome to This Fat Girl Life, the podcast. I am your host, Kimberly Pleasure, and today I am so honored to have Sarah here from Sarah Explains It All, and we are going to be talking boundaries. Before we get into that, though, you guys, y'all know I live on coffee, especially during daylight saving time. Coffee is my happy place. Coffee keeps me out of jail, keeps me from doing bad things. Coffee is life. So if you want to help support what I'm doing, just go over to buymeacoffee.com / this fat girl life. There you have a couple different options. You could just follow me. That's free of charge. You're going to see updates on things that I'm doing, projects I have coming up, that type of thing. But if you become a member, you could do that for $5 a month. That is cheaper than buying a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And with your membership, not only do you get to find out what's going on, but you get to have freebies. I've got both my guided journals over there that are free for you just for being a member. It's my gift, my thank you. And you're also going to find out some other stuff that I have coming up that only members will know. So buymeacoffee.com / this fat girl life. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Sorry, I've turned my laptop a different way and I seem to be half on the screen and half off of it. I
You
don't
know,
have,
I do it all the time.
yeah, and I don't have daylight savings time to blame. It's 4 o'clock here. So, yeah. Thank you
Well,
so
what?
much for having me.
Of course, of course. Why don't you take a quick moment and just kind of tell everybody who you are?
So, I'm a menstrual cycle coach or a period coach who teaches women business owners how to harness the power of their natural energy cycles to avoid overwhelm and burnout and to be more productive and to create more success in their lives and their businesses.
And I
So,
think,
yeah.
that burnout and that, lack of productivity, I think, regardless of whether you're dealing with a menstrual cycle or you're post, you know, menopausal or even in the throes of menopause,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's something that we all struggle with. But boundaries, especially, and I think that they play a part together. Because I have found with boundaries, you can set them, you can draw that fine line in the sand. But a boundary is no good unless you enforce it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of times people will look at boundaries and they'll think, oh, I'm being selfish. Oh, well, I said that I should do that. So I have to do that. I have to push through. I have to do this. It's my word. If I don't do it, people won't like me. They'll think I'm flaky. And really, I think, I read once, like people will start to respect you more the more that you instill and enforce your boundaries. I'm very good at boundaries. If I don't want to do something, I'm like, can we please just reschedule? I'm not feeling very well, or I'm tired. Also, being able to know the 2 weeks or the 2.5 weeks of the month that I am going to be on it, I am going to have energy, I am going to want to be around people, makes setting and sticking to those boundaries a lot easier because I know that in those 2.5 weeks of of the month that I can make plans and not need to worry a bit about my energy levels or to think, oh, well, I'm not going to necessarily want to do that because XYZ. So being able to track your cycle and to know your cycle does help making boundaries and sticking to them a little bit easier.
And see, I'm the person, there are some boundaries that come so easy to me. And then there are definitely harder ones. One of my biggest ones right now is about diet culture. And I know, I kind of mentioned that during our interview of I don't discuss diet culture. Reason for that, and this is not something that I've been very public about, is I actually have an eating disorder. So talk of diet culture for me is extremely toxic. And trying to really enforce that with with a stranger, it's easy. I can just say, hey, you know what, this will not be discussed. But when it comes to family or friends, it's so much harder.
Yeah, and I think I like to say, I like to create my boundaries from a place of values. And if not talking about that is going to move me closer to a boundary of safety or a boundary of well-being or whatever your not boundary, sorry, your value, um, then you know you're in the right place, and it's a lot easier to instill, I think. Also, it takes a lot of practice. And that's something that we don't always want to hear. We're busy. We want that instant gratification. That is the culture we live in. Case in point, I ran out of allergy medicine. I've had an allergy attack today. I've had to send my husband to the supermarket because I won't get my allergy medicine delivery until Wednesday, which I won't be able to survive until Wednesday. But it's that instant gratification. It's the I'm going to order it and I'll have it tomorrow. Um, Boundaries don't always work like that. Some do,
No, they don't.
but a lot of times you do have to have a lot of practice, and it comes from a place of self care, I think, a lot of times, and a place of self worth for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Self worth, which again, I think those are two huge buzzwords, but are very lacking when it comes to women. We don't have a lot of self worth because society teaches us not to. And so, again, putting those boundaries into place and sticking to them is really difficult because we don't have a huge amount of self worth to bank
Ex-
on.
exactly. When you have that inner voice that is telling you this isn't that big of a deal, just do it or just go, suck it up, it'll be fine. When you have that inner voice, it is really hard to shut that voice up.
Yeah.
And it does, like you said, it takes practice, but it also, you kind of have to look about who you're dealing with those boundaries. If you have somebody in your life that is constantly pushing that boundary, testing that boundary, overstepping that boundary, you have to decide really within yourself if that person is worth having in your life. Because if they cannot respect those boundaries, they're not respecting you. And that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, I moved to another country. So not really the answer for most people. Distance makes the heart grow fonder. It does. It is really tricky. It is but again, I think it's those conversations, and you as the adult, as the person who is trying to protect that boundary, you come at it from a place of love, and you know that person, so you know how to approach it. And maybe there is just no great way to do it, and you just have to say, look, I can't talk about this with you, or I'm not going to do that for you anymore, or if I am going to do that, then I would like this in return. They're hard conversations that we always have to have. And again, it is around communication. And particularly in those harder instances, trying to do it without emotion can be really, really tricky. So an
Yep.
emotion like comes up for me, I always find, and I do this a lot with my husband, I always find that sending a message, sending a WhatsApp message or an email can just take that sort of emotion out of it a bit more. You can think about what you want to say. You're not having to think about it on the fly, which I don't do very well. I like to have a little bit of space to come up with my response. And that really helps diffuse the situation. So that is a tip that you could do, is to just try and do it via an email or even a WhatsApp message, because they're a little bit more personal. But yeah, it is all about the communication in those
Mm-hmm.
instances, and how you go about framing it and phrasing it.
100% agree. And every relationship that we're going to have in our lives is different.
Hmm.
So that communication level may look very differently. What works, I'll use myself as an example. What works for my husband and I does not work for most of the people in my life. Because my husband and I, when we first met, we had that tough conversation of, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is where I'm at. And we both kind of set those boundaries from day one. And we talk about everything. Like, there are couples that fight about finances. We don't have that fight because we don't even buy a can of Monster without talking to the other one, which seems strange to other people that we talk about all of it. But by having those conversations, that's our boundary. So you've got to find what works for the different relationships within your life. And that can be almost time consuming, putting in that effort. But if you're not willing to put in that effort, maybe there's your boundary of, you're not worth my time. So why are you here?
Yeah. And also, I think it depends, like, as you said, on the person that it is, like, I'm a completely different person to the girl who left her hometown when she was 17. It's very difficult for my family to see me as a nearly 40-year-old versus the 17. So they still treat me. And my husband would comment on that when we would go home. He's like, they act like you're about 12. Like, you're 30. We have a child. Like, and so even in those instances, the way that you have to come at those conversations is very different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you're right. If you can't even make the time to have those all encompassing conversations, then you probably have the answer to your boundary right there. Um, and that's, why are you in my life, kind of thing.
Exactly. And honestly, as much as it sucks to have to look at that, it is so refreshing once those, little boundaries are set. And I know, we're using this word boundaries, and a lot of people may not even understand what boundaries mean. For me, what a boundary is it is that fine line in the sand that you are not willing to cross. That, and I'm going to use my personal life again, diet culture. I do not have conversations about it. I am very intentional in that. Before any guest comes on my podcast, I tell them this will not be discussed. And if somebody cannot respect that, then they are not respecting the boundary that I have set. And that's what boundaries are, is setting those limits.
And everyone will have their own definition of what boundaries are, right? And that's the beauty of boundary and self-care and self-worth, is that you can use your language to create what that is and what that means to
Mhm.
you. For me, boundaries means it is a way for me to ensure that I have enough energy and enough spark in my day to day to carry on doing the stuff that I love. I am a manifesting generator, if anyone follows human design, and I have, like, I'm an energizer bunny. I want to go, 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 go all the time. But what can happen is that I go, 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 doing all the stuff that doesn't light me up, and all the stuff like I'm picking up all of the pieces and I'm making sure everybody else's day to day runs really smoothly, but I'm not looking at my own day to day and what lights me up. And that leads to burnout really, really quickly. And that leads to
Mhm.
overwhelm really, really quickly. So for me, I have to really look and be very careful and very mindful of what my diary looks like and what I'm saying yes to. And I do this exercise pretty much weekly. I will look at my diary, and if I have things in my diary that are not moving me forward to a value or to a goal, then I think long and hard about whether or not it lights me up. And if it doesn't, if it's kind of like I could do that, but I don't really want to do that, I look for a way to rearrange it or to cancel it. Because by saying no to something that doesn't light me up is a bit of a meh. I'm opening up an opportunity for something to come in that I am going to be so lit up by. And that is
Mhm.
how I view a boundary. So yeah.
Well, and I love that this is the second time you've brought it up is setting boundaries as and enforcing boundaries is a form of self-care. When people think self-care, unfortunately, a lot of us have been conditioned to think that self-care is selfish,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not. Uh, Self-care is a form of health care. You have to do it. It's not a want to. It is a have to.
And equally, I think self care, a lot of people are like, oh, but that means like a spa or a massage or getting my nails done or like, no, self care is whatever works for you. You know, like I have friends who view a 5 mile run as self care. I can assure you that a 5 minute run is never going to be self care for me ever on any planet,
Yes.
right? Whereas I take a bath every single night. I go to the gym and I lift weights. I do a Pilates class. They are, I have mornings where I don't go to the gym. I have a cup of coffee and I read for an hour. Like those are my self care activities. And it is so personal to me. I know some friends who would be like, what? You get up at 5:40 so that you can have a cup of coffee and read for an hour? I'm going to sleep for that hour. Fine, fair enough. That is your version of self care. We have
Mhm.
to get out of this mindset again of this burnout culture, which I think, the pandemic did a really good, did a lot bad, but it did a really good shining a light over this burnout culture that we've been living in, in the Western world. And I do think that by being on lockdown, particularly in the UK when we really couldn't go anywhere, I'm not quite sure what it was in the US, there was a lot of different rules, but in the UK, we had to stay at home. We could go out for like an hour. And it really made you reevaluate what you felt was important and needed to stay in your life and what could go away. And also, it showed you where you were leaking, I think.
Mhm.
Because there was a lot of energy just being leaked out every single day by doing a load of junk that didn't serve you. Um, and so we were allowed as a society, a burnout culture, to actually just take time to stop and to reevaluate. And I do think self care is becoming much more common. And,
Yes.
like there is a wellness industry, and, we can have a completely different conversation about that. But it does then give you a lot of different ideas as to what self-care could be for you, and it
Exactly.
doesn't have to be a bath or a massage. It could be a trip down to your favorite coffee shop or a museum.
And for me, self care is the nails, the pedicure. Oh my God, the pedicure. My husband and I go together. It is our time, but we do this probably once a month of going and getting an hour and a half long pedicure and getting my nails done. And we go out for a meal on that day. It is a day that is just, I have no responsibilities. And I need that. But I also take time daily and do cross stitch.
Yeah.
Just cross stitching. Working on Christmas presents in March, but I just cross stitch. And for me, that clears my mind because it almost seems like with every stitch, one stress is released. And that's where I think the importance of self care is. It is finding what is going to kind of push that pressure valve on the pressure cooker and release the steam.
Mm.
That is self care.
Yeah. And you come back to yourself. I talk a lot in with my clients about, women are born with an innate knowledge of listening to our bodies and what our bodies are trying to tell us. And society teaches us to not listen, right? And self-care is just a beautiful way of having authority over your own body and coming home to yourself. And again,
Mm-hmm.
that can look like anything to anyone. Cross stitching, quite honestly, doesn't would not light me up. I'd make too much of a mess, and then I'd get really annoyed because I'd have to take all the stitches out, and it would just be a mess, right? Whereas, going to have coffee every single day or having a ritual around that isn't everyone's cup of tea. So I do think that it's a remembering, and it is a coming home to yourself in whatever way
Mm-hmm.
that is, in whatever way that looks like for you. It is almost like a huge sigh, like a I can do this, I can keep
Yes.
going, I'm
Yes.
doing okay.
So that is my challenge for everybody this week. Find something that brings you back to self. One act of self care. Set that boundary. And I want to know how that looks for you, how it looked. So I want you to do hashtag self care and tell me what you did for self care. I am so looking forward to seeing that in the comments and seeing what everybody else is doing for self care. Because sometimes knowing what somebody else does will trigger a spark in you, especially if self care has not been practiced in your life. Maybe hearing it from somebody else can encourage you. So that is the challenge this week. And again, that's going to be hashtag self care. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me. I think it's been great and definitely needed to happen.
Thank you so much for having me. And just one final note on boundaries is that it doesn't have to take a lot of time. I think a lot of people do think, oh, it's going to have to be this 45-minute routine and all the bells and the whistles. And it really doesn't. It could be walking outside barefoot, grounding, listening to the birds sing for 2 minutes, right? Consciously breathing
Mhm.
for a minute. So do go out and find whatever self care looks like for you, and do let Kimberly know what that is.
I'm excited. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. I have one final question, and I ask this of every guest. What do you love about yourself?
Oh, my adaptability, I think. I've lived in a lot of different countries, doing a lot of different things, and I've always been a bit of a chameleon. So I have a really great way of adapting to a situation and putting people at ease. So I think that would probably be it.
I love it. Well, everybody, I am going to highly encourage you to go and check out Sarah's podcast. I can't speak. It is Sarah Explains It All. It is on Apple Podcasts, on everywhere. Everywhere that you can hear a podcast, you're going to find it. Check it out. It's definitely worth listening to. And I hope everybody has an amazing week. Love yourselves. Be happy. Be safe. Be well. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye.
Bye.